Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird. Welcome to the Blackbird Grimoire and Wicca 303. This month, the witchy theme that I have chosen for special focus is romance. Now, before you turn off the video or close up your ears just because perhaps the concept of romance isn't necessarily your thing, give me a moment and please just hear me out. For a start, to practice the craft of the wise requires having as good of an understanding as what is possible of human nature and the human experience. So, romantic attachments, the adventure of romance, and even romantic sensibilities as a philosophical worldview has been part of our species' existence since pretty much forever. So, it is a relevant topic on that basis alone. Secondly, we live in an era in which many people's romantic relationships are in an absolutely deplorable state. We see people who seek the carnal as though that was an end in and of itself, as well as the opposite extremes of those who take this rather bizarrely medieval view of courtly love, which seeks to reject the physical entirely in favor of the emotional and the spiritual, as if these things could actually be properly separated in an actual romantic relationship. Also, increasingly, I see a number of people on social media who take a very cold, clinical, a transactional attitude towards the most intimate aspects of life. It is grotesquely anti human, and those circles seem absolutely obsessed with exerting power as opposed to forming healthy and mutually supportive relationships. And then there's the ongoing problem of people who would like a relationship but are too timid to pursue one for whatever reason. And then others who've had a series of very bad relationships and they've just sworn off this part of life for fear of suffering another broken heart. And thirdly, witches tend to be consulted about two major issues: money and romantic relationships. If we are to be a benefit to the community and not a hindrance to it, we need to get our heads on straight regarding romance. Now, our pagan ancestors were obviously no strangers to romance. There's plenty of lore filled with tales, and some of these end quite happily. Others are very tragic. Many are in between. And frequently, what we'll find are patterns of only finding fulfillment after that love has successfully endured trials. So we can reasonably assume that people have always been and will always be just people, and matters of the heart is part of the human experience. Now, in Wiccan tradition, one of the key principles is seeking the balance of the masculine and the feminine within the divine realms, within human relationships, and even within our own being. It isn't about domination or demonization of either side, it's about health, harmony, and balance. Successful relationships tend to consist of partners who have complementary strengths, and as they learn to work together in a more cohesive way, they become stronger and more powerful together than they could have ever been apart. This reinforces their bond, and by extension, that enriches the lives of both parties and any children they may produce. In order for this to happen, there must be a mutual, conscious acceptance of the other, without the expectation of one party converting to the mode of being favored by the other. These differences must be appreciated, and a non competitive equilibrium needs to be established. Now, let's get into that tricky minefield of the so called love spell. In all probability, there will come a time in your practice in which someone might ask you to perform a love spell on their behalf, or that you might feel tempted to do one for yourself. So, first things first, we must acknowledge the difference between casting a spell to attract romance into your life and casting a spell attempting to make someone love you. There is no objection to performing a spell that is intended to attract a partner, not any particular one, but just trying to bring someone suitable into your life. There is no problem with that, or to, anyone else. If you're acting on someone else's behalf, that's perfectly fine to do, to just kind of arrange to put them in the proper energy's path. However, There are a myriad of problems with any attempt to make someone love you or make someone love someone else, not the least of which is the reality of free will and respect for the other person's proper autonomy over their lives, including, and not the least of which, is the bodily autonomy of the spell's target. So let this be said and let it be understood once and for all. No one has any obligation to be romantically involved with anyone else. Unrequited love isn't a pleasant experience, but it does not create an obligation on the part of the object of one's affections. Secondly, a targeted love spell does not, I repeat, does not create the emotion of love within the target. Now, I have heard it argued that since all things are energy, including love, and witches manipulate energy all the time, and that therefore, because of this, love can be created through magical spell work. Now, at first glance, you might think that this viewpoint passes the smell test, but let's give it another think. All energy has a source. If the target of the love spell is not producing that kind of energy, then if it isn't naturally occurring for the source of energy for the love spell, therefore it has to be coming from somewhere else. It's not coming from the target, it's being brought in artificially. Now we get to the real nitty gritty. Because this energy has nothing to do with genuine love or devotion or respect, it's about imposing one's will. It is a binding spell. When the target is bound, their will is overridden. They are subject to the programming of the spell for as long as it holds. Any loving behaviors or expressions of such are no more than just a puppet responding to strings that have been pulled. I cannot emphasize enough that this isn't a real relationship and is worse than an illusion. It is an actual crime against the target. It is corrosive to the soul of the person who wanted the spell and the person who cast it. So let's not fool ourselves. If someone wants a love spell, then they also want the physical expression of love to go along with it. When the target is bound, the target is not in a position to give consent to any kind of sexual contact. Therefore, any sexual encounters are, when under the influence of a love spell, they are for all intents and purposes rape. There is no moral difference between physically overpowering someone or overpowering them with magical force. The end result is the same. And let there be no confusion about the nature of what so-called love spells are, how they function, or what results from it. It is absolutely imperative to understand this because I've heard all kinds of rationalizations and people have had terrible consequences for themselves and for the target. So, now that we have thoroughly established that love spells do not create love and therefore do not live up to their label, let's look a little bit further into those consequences of these workings. To begin with, the spell doesn't always take. Sometimes the target is just naturally resistant to such influence, or they have a strong enough sense of self to reject these attempts of manipulation, even if they aren't aware that they're occurring. That tends to create even greater distance between the person who's wanting the attention and the person who just isn't inclined towards that individual. Now, if the spell is successful, sooner or later the target wakes up. And then once they wake up, they experience varying degrees of urgency to disentangle themselves from the situation as soon as possible. And if the spell backfires, instead of having a puppet on a string, you wind up with a rather obsessive stalker. And good luck fixing that before there are dangerous consequences. Of course, however the situation turns out, the person who wanted the spell, the one who cast it, and the target all have to live with the train wreck of the results. The target has to overcome this victimization, and it is victimization. And anyone who was involved with doing that, they have to live with the fact that they saw fit to victimize, that it didn't matter to them ultimately if that person said yes or no. They wanted what they wanted, and they just decided they were going to get what they wanted through any means necessary. Once you sweep away the rationalizations and the emotionalism surrounding the subject of so-called love spells and you actually think about the mechanics of it and the implications of this working, it becomes quite clear why no ethical practitioner would engage in such a thing and why so many experienced witches and ethical witches are absolutely insistent upon the point that this is not something to meddle in. So, homework for February 5th through February 11th. Number one, what are your feelings and attitudes towards romance? And what feelings and attitudes have you noticed in others? Two, based upon your understanding of human nature and your spiritual worldview, journal about what you think the dynamic between romantic partners should actually be. And three, meditate about the nature of love spells and ask yourself what you really think. Believe me, you'll save yourself a whole lot of bother if you do this at the beginning. So that is what I have for you this week. Next week, we will be getting into the topic of rising to the occasion and acting in a more priestly function when you are called upon to do so. So I'll help you be back for that. In the meantime, comments, questions, concerns, complaints, leave them for me in the comments section or email me at brigantiablackbird@protonmail.com and we can have a more extended discussion there. But that'll do it for now, and I'll see you next time. Bye.